The day my sister announced her engagement, I became invisible, not literally, of course. I still occupied space in our childhood home, my feet still made the floorboards creak, my breath still fogged the bathroom mirror each morning. But in the ways that mattered, in the eyes of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, I had ceased to exist. Aren't you going to congratulate your sister, Jordan? My mother's voice cut through the champagne-soaked celebration like a knife I'd felt 1,000 times before. I looked up from my untouched glass, meeting my sister Melissa's triumphant gaze across the dining table. She wore her engagement ring like a weapon, 3 carats of carefully selected spite, catching the light with every calculated gesture. Congratulations, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Melissa's smile widened. She knew. She always knew. My father raised his glass higher, his face flushed with pride and expensive wine. To Melissa and Richard, may your life together be filled with every blessing you deserve, every blessing you deserve. The words echoed in my mind as I mechanically lifted my glass. Because Melissa deserved everything, didn't she? The bigger bedroom, the newer car, the college tuition paid in full while I worked 3 jobs to scrape together community college credits. The unconditional support when she came out as bisexual at 19. While my own coming out as gay 2 years earlier had been met with silence so profound it still rang in my ears. Jordan's being quiet again, my Aunt Linda observed, her tone suggesting this was somehow a moral failing. You should be happier for your sister. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do best. I smiled politely and excused myself to the bathroom, where I could breathe without feeling like I was stealing oxygen meant for someone more important. The bathroom mirror reflected a face I barely recognized anymore. At 25, I should have been coming into my own, but instead, I looked hollowed out, a sketch of a person rather than the finished painting. My dark hair needed cutting, my eyes carried shadows that makeup couldn't hide, and my jawline, which my ex-boyfriend Marco had once called criminally beautiful, was tight with tension. Marco. I hadn't thought about him in weeks. That was progress, I supposed. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Riley, surviving the golden child's coronation. I typed back, barely, send help, or a getaway car. Riley, how about both? I'm outside. I stared at the message, then at my reflection. For once, the choice felt clear. I didn't return to the dining room. I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack, slipped out the front door, and slid into Riley's beat-up Toyota like I was escaping a crime scene. That bad? Riley asked, already pulling away from the curb. Worse. I leaned my head against the cool window. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Riley had been my anchor since middle school, the person who saw me when everyone else looked through me. They were non-binary, sharp-witted, and possessed a moral compass that pointed true north even when mine spun wildly. Tonight, they wore a leather jacket over a vintage band tee, their undercut freshly trimmed, and their dark eyes filled with concern. You can't keep doing this to yourself, they said softly. You're worth more than their scraps. Am I? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Because I'm starting to wonder. We drove in silence to our usual spot, overlook on the edge of town where the city lights spread below like fallen stars. Riley cut the engine, and we sat in the darkness, the only sound our breathing and the distant hum of traffic. Tell me what happened. Riley finally said. So I did. I told them everything. How my mother had spent the entire week preparing for Melissa's engagement party, calling every relative, ordering a custom cake, hiring a photographer. How when I'd mentioned my recent promotion at the graphic design firm, a promotion I'd worked 18 months to earn, my mother had said, "That's nice, dear." Without looking up from her phone, I told them how my father had pulled me aside last month to ask if I could loan Melissa $5,000 for her wedding. As if I had that kind of money lying around. As if I hadn't been eating ramen for dinner 3 nights a week to make rent. I told them about the family photos hung throughout the house, dozens of Melissa at every age and stage, smiling her perfect smile. And the single photo of me, tucked in the corner of the hallway, from my high school graduation. In it, I was mid-blink, My face half turned away. Even in our family gallery, I was an afterthought. They've never forgiven me for being gay, I said, the words finally finding air. They pretend they have. They use the right pronouns for your partner and all that progressive language. But they treat Melissa's bisexuality like it's exotic and interesting, while mine is just disappointing. Riley reached over and squeezed my hand. Their homophobia is not your failure. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. I turned to face them, feeling tears I'd been holding back for years beginning to surface. But Riley, I'm so tired. I'm tired of being the problem. I'm tired of apologizing for existing. I'm tired of watching my sister get everything while I get silence. Then stop apologizing, Riley said fiercely. Stop showing up to places where you're not valued. Stop giving them power over your happiness. It's not that simple, isn't it? I opened my mouth to argue, but my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. Don't answer it, Riley warned. I answered it. Jordan, where did you go? My mother's voice was tight with barely concealed irritation. You embarrassed your sister by leaving in the middle of her party. The least you could do is come back and apologize. Something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the assumption that I owed Melissa an apology for existing separately from her moment. Maybe it was the complete absence of any question about whether I was okay. Maybe it was just 25 years of accumulated silence finally reaching critical mass. No, I said. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not coming back. I'm not apologizing. I'm done. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could picture my mother's face, the shock, the indignation, the way her lips would thin into that disapproving line I knew so well. If you leave now, don't bother coming to the wedding, she said finally. Her voice ice. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied, and hung up. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. But somewhere beneath the fear and adrenaline, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Riley was grinning. Holy shit, you actually did it. I actually did it, I repeated, testing the words. Then louder. I actually did it. We both started laughing, the kind of wild, borderline, hysterical laughter that comes when you've finally broken free of something that's been slowly suffocating you. But as the laughter faded, reality crept back in. I'd just severed ties with my family. I had no safety net, no backup plan. Just a one-bedroom apartment I could barely afford, a job that paid okay, but not great, and a future that suddenly felt terrifyingly open. You can crash with me, Riley offered, reading my mind. My couch is lumpy, but it's yours for as long as you need it. I have an apartment, I know. But you also have a tendency to self-isolate when you're hurting, and I'm not letting you do that this time. I wanted to argue, but they were right. Okay, but just for a few days, we'll see, Riley said, starting the car. As we drove back into the city, I watched the lights blur past, each one a life I'd never know, a story I'd never be part of. And for the first time in my life, that felt like possibility instead of exclusion. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Melissa. You always have to make everything about you, don't you? This was my night. I stared at the message, feeling that old, familiar guilt rising like nausea. Then I remembered something my therapist had told me during one of our sessions last year. Before, I'd stopped going because I couldn't afford it. You can't reason with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. I blocked Melissa's number. Then my mother's. Then my father's. Scorched earth. Riley observed approvingly. Scorched earth. I agreed. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that my small act of defiance would set off a chain of events that would ultimately expose the ugly truth beneath my family's perfect surface. That my silence would finally break in ways I never imagined. That revenge, when it came, would be delivered not by my hand, but by the consequences they'd spent years carefully avoiding. But that night, driving through the city with my best friend, with the taste of freedom still sharp and new on my tongue, I didn't think about revenge. I thought about survival. I thought about building a life where I wouldn't have to apologize for existing. I thought about becoming visible not to them, but to myself, the first step was done. I'd walked away. Now I just had to figure out where I was walking to. 3 weeks after I cut contact with my family, I started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. It wasn't immediate. The first few days were brutal, a cocktail of guilt, anxiety, and liberation that left me alternating between euphoria and panic attacks. Riley's couch became my life raft, and they became the voice of reason when my mind tried to convince me I'd made a terrible mistake. "You're grieving," Riley explained one night, passing me a cup of chamomile tea. They'd insisted I try. "Not just your family, but the family you hoped they'd become. That shit takes time." They were right. I was mourning people who were still alive, still posting happy family photos on social media that I couldn't stop myself from checking late at night when insomnia crept in. But I was also discovering something unexpected. I was good company for myself, without the constant background radiation of my family's disappointment. I started remembering who I'd been before I learned to make myself small. I'd always loved graphic design, but somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself I wasn't talented enough to pursue it seriously. Now, freed from the voices telling me to be more practical, more invisible, more grateful for whatever scraps I received, I started taking on freelance projects. My first client was a local queer bookstore that needed a website redesign. The owner, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Diane, took one look at my portfolio and hired me on the spot. "You've got an eye," she said, scrolling through my work. "And more than that, you've got heart. I can see it in every design choice." The project consumed me in the best possible way. I spent hours crafting a site that felt warm and welcoming, with hidden details for observant visitors, rainbow gradients in the shadows, subtle references to queer literature embedded in the navigation. When Diane saw the final product, she cried. "This is exactly what I wanted, but didn't know how to ask for," she said, hugging me tight. "You're incredibly talented, Jordan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The validation hit harder than I expected. I went home to Riley's apartment and cried for an hour, releasing years of being told my passions didn't matter, that art was a hobby, not a career. "You're allowed to be proud of yourself," Riley reminded me. "You're allowed to succeed." The bookstore project led to others. Word of mouth in the queer community worked fast. Suddenly, I had more work than I could handle: a lesbian couple's wedding website, a trans support group's rebranding, a drag performer's promotional materials. Each project felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. But success, I learned, has a way of attracting attention you don't always want. 6 weeks after I'd walked out of my family home, I was at a coffee shop downtown, working on a logo design, when someone cleared their throat above me. "Jordan?" I looked up into the face of Richard Chen, my sister's fiancé. He looked uncomfortable, his hand rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture I recognized from the handful of family dinners we'd shared. Richard had always been pleasant enough to me, polite, if somewhat distant. He worked in finance, wore expensive suits, and had the kind of generically handsome face that belonged in a catalog. "Richard," I acknowledged, my stomach tightening. "What are you doing here? Can I sit?" He gestured to the empty chair across from me. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to protect the peace I'd worked so hard to build. But curiosity won out. 5 minutes, I said. He sat, ordering an Americano from the passing barista before turning his attention back to me. "I wanted to talk to you before things get worse. Worse than my entire family cutting me off for daring to have boundaries." "That's not fair." "They didn't cut you off. You disappeared." I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. "Is that what they told you? That I disappeared? Did they mention why?" Richard had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Melissa said you were jealous, that you couldn't handle her happiness." "Of course she did." I closed my laptop, giving him my full attention. "Let me guess, she's been texting you, calling you, making you feel guilty for having any kind of relationship with me?" His silence was answer enough. "Richard, I'm going to tell you something, and you can believe me or not. I don't really care anymore." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. My sister has spent our entire lives ensuring that I get nothing while she gets everything. And my parents enabled it because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting they've been complicit in emotional abuse for 25 years. That seems dramatic, does it? I interrupted. Did you know that when I came out as gay at 16, my parents didn't speak to me for 3 months? That they sent me to conversion therapy? His face paled. Melissa never mentioned, of course she didn't. It doesn't fit the narrative. But when she came out as bisexual 2 years later, they threw her a coming out party, hired a rainbow cake, posted about being proud allies on Facebook. I felt old anger rising, hot and sharp. Do you know what it's like to watch your parents celebrate in your sister the exact thing they punished you for? Richard's Americano arrived. He didn't touch it. I didn't come here to relitigate my childhood, I continued. I came here to work, to build something that's mine, to exist without apologizing for it. So if you're here as Melissa's messenger, you can tell her I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm not here for Melissa, Richard said quietly. I'm here because I think you deserve to know something. The shift in his tone made me pause. Know what? He pulled out his phone, scrolling for a moment before turning the screen toward me. Melissa's been posting about you. I looked at the Instagram post. It was a photo of Melissa looking tearful and beautiful, captioned with a long story about her struggling brother who had abandoned the family during her happiest moment because he couldn't handle not being the center of attention. The post had hundreds of comments, most of them sympathetic, calling me selfish, immature, toxic. My hands clenched into fists. She's using her coming out story to make herself the victim. She's literally weaponizing queerness, her own and mine, for sympathy points. There's more. Richard swiped to another post. This one was Melissa with our parents, all three of them looking somber. The caption read, "Family isn't always easy. Sometimes you have to accept that not everyone wants to be part of your joy. Sending love to anyone else dealing with a difficult sibling." I felt something cold and clarifying settle in my chest. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was character assassination. Why are you showing me this? I asked Richard. He met my eyes, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Doubt, because I'm starting to see things that don't add up, he admitted. Last week, Melissa told me you'd sent her a threatening message. But when I asked to see it, she said she'd deleted it. Then yesterday, she told your parents you'd been spreading lies about them to your friends. When I asked what lies, she got defensive. She's always been good at playing the victim. I said softly, I love her, Richard said, almost pleading. But I'm not blind. And some of the things she's said about you, they don't match the person I'm talking to right now. We sat in silence for a moment, the coffee shop buzzing around us with the comfortable noise of strangers living their separate lives. What do you want from me? I finally asked. I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to see for myself if you were the monster she's painting you as. He smiled sadly. You're not. Does it matter? You're still marrying her. I am, he acknowledged. But I think I'm going into it with my eyes a little more open now. After Richard left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at Melissa's Instagram posts until Riley texted asking if I was still alive. I screenshot the posts and sent them over. Riley's response was immediate. What the actual fuck? This is slander. It's not worth engaging with. I typed back. Maybe not. But you can't let her control the narrative. But what was the alternative? Publicly defending myself would look like exactly what Melissa was accusing me of, making everything about me, stealing her spotlight. Staying silent meant letting people believe her version of events. I was trapped in a game I'd never agreed to play, with rules that changed every time I thought I understood them. That night, back at Riley's apartment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight Melissa on social media. I wasn't going to send angry messages or air our family's dirty laundry publicly. Instead, I was going to do something that would hurt her more than any confrontation could. I was going to succeed without her. I updated my portfolio website, added testimonials from my recent clients, and created a business Instagram showcasing my design work. Not a single post mentioned my family. Not one photo showed anything personal. Just clean, professional, beautiful work that spoke for itself. Within days, I had new inquiries. Within 2 weeks, I had enough freelance work to consider whether I could leave my day job. Within a month, I'd been featured in a local design blog as an emerging talent to watch. Melissa's Instagram posts about me stopped. Not because she'd forgiven me, but because I'd stopped being a convenient victim. I'd become competition, and my mother, who had always dismissed my career as that computer thing you do, suddenly started calling. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemails. They evolved over weeks from demanding I apologize to Melissa, to suggesting we all just move past this, to finally, tentatively asking if we could talk. I saved them all. Not out of spite, but as evidence. Evidence that I wasn't crazy. That the silence had been real. That I'd been treated as disposable until I made myself valuable. Riley listened to the messages with me one night, their face darkening with each successive voicemail. They only want you back now that you're successful, they observed. That's not love, Jay. That's ownership. I know. Do you? Because I see that look in your eyes. That hopeful look that maybe this time will be different. I wanted to deny it, but Riley knew me too well. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm the problem? Stop it. Riley grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to meet their eyes. You set a boundary. They punish you for it. Now that you're thriving without them, they want back in. This is textbook narcissistic family dynamics. You're not wrong. You're just finally seeing clearly. They were right. I knew they were right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 8 weeks after I'd walked away from my family, I received an email from my Aunt Linda, the same aunt who'd criticized my quietness at Melissa's engagement party. The subject line read, "We need to talk." I almost deleted it, but something made me open it instead. Jordan, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. I've been thinking about the engagement party, about how we all treated you, and I'm ashamed. I told myself I was staying neutral, but silence in the face of injustice isn't neutrality. It's complicity. Your cousin Maya came out to me last week as pansexual. She's 15, and when she told me, the first thing she said was, "Please don't treat me like you all treated Jordan." That broke my heart. And it made me realize I'd been watching your family scapegoat you for years and done nothing. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I see you now. And I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Aunt Linda read the email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't absolution. It didn't fix anything. But it was acknowledgement. It was proof that I hadn't imagined it all. I wrote back, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for saying something. You're the first person in our family who has." Her response came quickly. "Then let me be the second person to tell you this. What your parents did to you was wrong. The conversion therapy, the favoritism, the way they erased you from their lives while celebrating Melissa. All of it, wrong. And Melissa knows. She's always known." I think that might be the worst part. The words hit like a physical blow. Because some part of me had always held on to the hope that Melissa was oblivious, that she simply hadn't noticed the disparity in how we were treated, but she'd known. She'd known, and she'd taken advantage of it. That realization changed something fundamental in me. It burned away the last threads of guilt, the lingering what-ifs, the desire to make peace at any cost. I wasn't interested in revenge, but I was very interested in truth, and truth, I was about to discover, had a way of emerging. Whether you sought it or not, the truth began to unravel 3 months after I'd walked away. And it started with something absurdly mundane, a wedding venue. I was having lunch with Aunt Linda, our first face-to-face meeting since her apology email, when she mentioned it casually, as if it were just another piece of family gossip. "Did Melissa tell you they had to change venues?" The Riverside Manor fell through. I paused mid-bite of my sandwich. "I wouldn't know. We haven't spoken." Linda winced. "Right, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting." She hesitated, then continued. "It's just, Strange. Your mother told me the venue canceled on them, but I ran into Paula. You remember Paula Chen, Richard's mother? And she said something completely different. Different how? She said the venue didn't cancel. They did. Or rather, Melissa did. Paula seemed upset about it. Said it was unprofessional and that Melissa had refused to pay the cancellation fee. I set down my sandwich, suddenly very interested. That doesn't sound like Melissa. She loves grand gestures and expensive venues. That's what I thought. Linda lowered her voice, leaning across the table. But Paula said something else. She said Melissa had been acting erratically lately, missing wedding planning meetings, changing her mind constantly. She seemed worried about Richard. A strange feeling settled in my stomach, not quite satisfaction, not quite concern. Something in between. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything, Linda said carefully. Just passing along what I heard. But Jordan, I know you and Melissa have history. Painful history. And I know you've cut ties. But if something's really wrong, then it's not my problem, I said, perhaps too quickly. She made sure I wouldn't be part of her life. I'm just honoring that boundary. Linda nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Just, if you hear anything, let me know. For Richard's sake, if nothing else. He's a good person. I promised I would, but privately, I doubted I'd hear anything. Melissa and I existed in completely different worlds now, but the universe, I was learning, had a dark sense of humor. 2 days later, Richard showed up at my apartment. I'd just moved out of Riley's place into a small one-bedroom I could finally afford, thanks to my growing freelance business. It wasn't much exposed brick that was more charming than structural, a kitchen the size of a closet, and neighbors who seemed to have a personal vendetta against quiet evenings, but it was mine. When I opened the door to find Richard standing there, looking rumpled and exhausted in a way I'd never seen him, my first instinct was to slam the door in his face. Please, he said, before I could. I need to talk to someone, and you're the only person who might actually understand. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He collapsed onto my thrift store couch, dropping his head into his hands. I think I'm making a mistake. I sat across from him in the worn armchair I'd rescued from a curb, saying nothing, waiting. The wedding is in 6 weeks, he continued, his voice muffled. 6 weeks and I'm having panic attacks. Real, physical, can't breathe panic attacks. My therapist asked me why I'm still going through with it, and I couldn't give her a good answer. Why are you telling me this? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Because you were right. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. That day at the coffee shop, when you said Melissa's always playing the victim. You were right, and I've been seeing it more and more, and I don't know what to do. Leave her, I said bluntly. If you're having panic attacks 6 weeks before your wedding, that's your body trying to tell you something. It's not that simple. It literally is though. He laughed, a broken sound. You don't understand. Your parents put $100,000 toward this wedding. My parents matched it. There are 300 guests. The invitations are sent. The deposits are paid. Sunk cost fallacy, I said. You're going to spend the rest of your life miserable because you're too afraid to lose money you've already spent? I love her. He said it like he was trying to convince himself. Do you? Or do you love who you thought she was? Richard stood abruptly, pacing my small living room. There's something I haven't told anyone. Something I found. My pulse quickened. Found? Emails? Between Melissa and her ex, Travis. They've been talking. A lot. And some of the messages. He trailed off, pulling out his phone. I shouldn't show you these. It's an invasion of privacy. But I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy. He handed me his phone. I scrolled through a series of email exchanges between Melissa and a name I vaguely remembered from years ago. Travis had been her college boyfriend, the one before she came out as bisexual. The messages started innocently enough, checking in, catching up. But as I scrolled, they became increasingly intimate. I miss you. Richard's nice, but he doesn't understand me like you do. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making a mistake. We should meet up before the wedding. One last time. I handed the phone back, feeling sick. When did you find these? Last week. I wasn't snooping. She left her laptop open and an email notification popped up. I know I should have respected her privacy, but something felt off. So I looked, and they met up. 3 weeks ago. She told me she was at a bachelorette planning meeting, but her friend Sophie called looking for her, asking if she was sick because she'd missed the meeting. We sat in silence. Outside my window, I could hear the city car horns, shouted conversations, the rumble of the subway beneath us, normal sounds of normal life, while inside my apartment, my sister's engagement was imploding. I don't know why I'm telling you this, Richard said. Maybe because you're the only person who won't tell me to just push through it for the sake of family harmony. You want permission to leave her, I said. You want someone to tell you it's okay to choose yourself, is it? I thought about the last 3 months of my life, the fear and the freedom, the loss and the growth. Richard, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. The cost of staying in something that's destroying you is always higher than the cost of leaving. He nodded slowly, something resolving in his face. I need to talk to her, really talk to her. After he left, I sat in my apartment feeling strange. I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't sought revenge or vindication. But watching Melissa's perfect life begin to crack felt like justice anyway, the universe's way of balancing scales I'd been too tired to hold. I called Riley. Richard just left my place, I said, when they answered. Melissa's been cheating, or emotionally cheating. The wedding might be off. Holy shit, yeah. How do you feel? I considered the question. Honestly, numb, and a little sad. Not for her, for him. And for the version of me that kept hoping she'd become a better person. She still could, Riley offered. Though they didn't sound convinced. Maybe, but it's not my job to wait around to find out. The next week unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Richard confronted Melissa. She denied everything, then admitted to the emails, but swore nothing physical happened, then finally confessed to meeting Travis for closure. Richard moved out of their shared apartment. The wedding remained technically on, but the engagement photos disappeared from Melissa's Instagram. And then my mother called me. I'd been ignoring her calls for months, but this time, curiosity won out. Jordan. Her voice was clipped, controlled. I need you to talk to your sister. No, excuse me? I said no. I'm not your messenger service. I'm not your family mediator. I'm not your scapegoat. I'm not anything to you, because you made that clear when you chose her over me for the 1000th time. This is different. Her wedding is falling apart. She needs her family. I laughed, the sound harsh. Where was her family when I needed them? Where were you when I was going through conversion therapy that you paid for? Where were you when I was working 3 jobs to afford community college? Where were you every single time I needed support and got silence instead? We're not perfect, Jordan, but we're still your family. No, I interrupted. You're Melissa's family. I'm just the inconvenient kid you wish you could forget. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me, Mom, when was the last time you asked about my life, my work, my happiness? When was the last time you celebrated my success or mourned my failures? When was the last time you saw me as anything other than a problem to be managed or a comparison to make Melissa look better? The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. I don't know what you want from me, she finally said, her voice small. I don't want anything from you anymore. That's the point. I'm done waiting for you to love me the way you love her. I'm done making myself smaller so she can shine brighter. I'm done with all of it. If you do this, if you abandon your sister now when she needs you, there's no coming back from it. Good, I said. Because I'm not planning to come back. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I blocked my father's. Then every other family member except Aunt Linda. Riley came over that night with Thai food and tequila. We ate on the floor of my apartment, backs against the couch, while I told them everything. I should feel worse than I do, I admitted. Her life is falling apart, and I feel nothing, maybe a little relieved. That's not nothing, Riley said. That's survival. You've spent your whole life absorbing their pain while they ignored yours. You're allowed to step back and let them feel their own consequences. It feels cruel. Cruelty would be actively destroying her wedding. You're just existing elsewhere while her choices catch up with her. That's different. I wanted to believe them. And mostly I did. But late that night, alone in my bed, I found myself thinking about Melissa. Not the Melissa who existed now, the one who'd stolen my spotlight, weaponized my identity, and played the victim at every turn, but the Melissa from childhood, before the division between golden child and scapegoat had been drawn in permanent ink. I remembered her teaching me to ride a bike when I was 6, her patience as I fell over and over. I remembered her defending me from bullies in middle school, her fierce protectiveness making me feel safe. I remembered the night I came out to her, before I'd told our parents, and how she'd hugged me and said, "I love you exactly as you are." When had that girl disappeared? Or had she ever really existed? Maybe I'd invented her, a sister-shaped fantasy to make the reality hurt less. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me look. This is Richard. I broke off the engagement. Thought you should know. Thank you for being honest with me when everyone else was lying. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I'm sorry it ended this way." His response came quickly. "I'm not. Better now than after the wedding." What will you do? Live my life. Figure out who I am outside of trying to please everyone else. Sound familiar? I smiled despite myself. Yeah, good luck with that. You too, Jordan. For what it's worth, I think you're going to be okay. I hoped he was right. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls, 30 to text messages, and a voicemail box so full it wouldn't accept new messages. All from my family, all variations on the same theme. I destroyed Melissa's happiness. I was vindictive and cruel. I'd manipulated Richard. I was a disgrace to the family. I deleted them all without listening past the first few seconds. Then I got dressed, made coffee, and sat down at my laptop to work on a new client project, a rebranding for a queer youth center. As I designed, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but something adjacent to it. Acceptance, maybe, of who my family was, of who they'd never be, of who I was becoming without them. The revenge I'd imagined in those first angry weeks after walking away had never materialized. I hadn't needed to plot or scheme or expose them. They'd expose themselves, the way people always do when you step back and let them show you who they really are. My silence, the silence they'd given me for so many years, had become my greatest weapon. Not because I wielded it against them, but because in the quiet space they'd created, I'd finally learned to hear my own voice, and that voice was telling me I deserved better. 6 months after the broken engagement, I was invited to speak at a design conference. It was small, maybe 200 people, mostly other freelancers and small business owners, but it was mine. My work, my story, my moment. The conference organizers had seen my portfolio and wanted me to talk about building a queer inclusive brand identity from the ground up. Riley helped me practice my speech, timing me and offering feedback while we sat in my apartment eating takeout Chinese. "You're bearing the lead," they said after my third run through. "You keep talking about design principles and color theory, but the real story is about finding your voice after years of silence. That feels too personal." "Jordan." Riley set down their low mien, fixing me with that look that meant they were about to say something I needed to hear. "Personal is why people will remember you. Anyone can teach design principles. You can teach people how to survive." So I rewrote my speech. And when I stood on that stage a week later, looking out at 200 strangers, I told them the truth. I told them about being the invisible child, about learning to make myself small, about finding my voice through design. I told them about walking away from people who didn't value me and building a life that did. I didn't name names or air all the details, but I told enough truth that when I finished, the applause lasted for 3 full minutes. Afterward, people approached me with stories of their own. A woman in her 40s who'd just come out and was rebuilding her life. A non-binary college student who'd been kicked out by their parents. A trans man who'd lost his entire family but found a new one. Each story was different, but the thread running through them was the same: survival, resilience, and the hard-won freedom of choosing yourself. You inspired me, one person said, shaking my hand. You gave me hope, said another, a younger person, maybe 22, approached me with tears in their eyes. My family is just like yours. I've been trying to decide whether to cut contact or keep trying. Thank you for showing me that sometimes choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. I drove home from the conference feeling lighter than I had in years. This, I realized, was the revenge I'd been unconsciously seeking, not destroying my family, but becoming someone they'd never expected me to be. Not despite their neglect, but because of it. They'd taught me what I didn't want to be, and in doing so, had inadvertently shown me who I was. That night, Aunt Linda called. I saw your conference speech, she said. Someone posted clips on TikTok. Jordan, I'm so proud of you. Thank you, I said, meaning it. Your mother saw it too. My stomach clenched. And she cried. Real crying, not performative. And then she said something I never thought I'd hear. I failed him. I sat down slowly, processing this. What did you say? I told her she was right, that she'd failed you for years, and one moment of realization didn't fix that, but that if she was serious about changing, she needed to start with accountability, not apologies. Is she serious about changing? Linda sighed. I don't know. I think she's starting to see what she's lost. Melissa is struggling. The broken engagement, the social media backlash when people found out why Richard left, the reality that her golden child status was built on your suffering. It's all catching up with her. And your mother is realizing that she enabled all of it. That's not my problem to fix, I said, but my voice was gentler than I expected. No, it's not. But Jordan, I think she wants to try. Really? Try. Not to make you come back, but to actually apologize, to take responsibility. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You don't have to be. But I wanted you to know, in case you ever are. After we hung up, I sat with the information. Part of me, the part that had spent 25 years hoping for parental love, wanted to run toward the possibility of reconciliation. But the part of me that had spent the last 6 months learning to trust myself knew better. Change didn't happen overnight. One realization didn't undo decades of damage. And I didn't owe them my forgiveness just because they'd finally noticed my absence. But I also didn't owe them my eternal anger. 3 weeks later, my mother requested to meet. Not at their house. Not somewhere familiar. At a neutral coffee shop, on my terms whenever I was ready. I made her wait another month. When we finally met, she looked smaller than I remembered. Older, tired. She ordered a coffee she didn't drink and spent the first 5 minutes staring at the table. I don't know how to start, she finally said. Start with the truth, I replied. So she did. She told me about her own childhood, about being the disappointment in her family, about swearing she'd never make her children feel how she'd felt. She told me about panicking when I came out, about the fear that she'd somehow failed me, about how conversion therapy had seemed like fixing a problem rather than torturing a child. I know that's not an excuse, she said. There is no excuse. I took my fear and my ignorance and I used them to hurt you. And then I watched your sister thrive, and I told myself I'd done the right thing, by pushing you harder, by expecting more, by treating me like I was less than her. I supplied, yes. She looked at me then, really looked at me, for maybe the first time in years. I see it now, how we made you invisible, how we celebrated in Melissa what we punished in you, how we let her take everything while you got silence. Why? I asked. The question I'd been carrying for so long. Why her and not me? I don't know. Maybe because she was easier. Maybe because she fit the picture I had in my head of who my children would be. Maybe because I was a coward who couldn't face my own prejudices. She wiped her eyes. I don't have a good answer, Jordan. Just a terrible truth. I failed you. And I'm sorry. I'd imagined this moment for months, the vindication. the satisfaction of hearing her admit what I'd always known. But sitting across from her, I felt something unexpected. Pity. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But apologies don't erase damage. They don't give me back the years I spent thinking I was fundamentally wrong. They don't heal the wounds that still wake me up at night, I know. But I'm hoping they're a start. A start to what? To me doing better. To me learning. To me, she paused, struggling. To me having some kind of relationship with you, if you'll allow it. Not the old relationship. That's dead. I killed it. But maybe something new? I sipped my coffee, buying time. What does Melissa think about this? Melissa is in therapy. Real therapy, finally. And she's starting to see her own part in this. The favoritism she exploited. The way she used your pain to make herself shine brighter. My mother's voice cracked. I failed both of you, in different ways. I made her cruel, and I made you invisible. I'm not invisible anymore. No, you're not. I saw your conference speech. You're extraordinary, Jordan. And I hate that I didn't see it before. I hate that strangers celebrated you while I criticized you. I hate she broke down, really crying now. I hate that I wasted so much time not knowing you. I handed her a napkin. We sat in silence while she composed herself. I need time, I finally said. I need to think about whether I want any kind of relationship with you. And I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't guaranteed. You can do everything right from here on out, and I might still decide the damage is too deep. I understand. And Melissa, I'm not ready to see her. Maybe ever. That's separate from you. I understand that too. We finished our coffees mostly in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Not the crushing silence of denial, but the tentative quiet of possibility. As I drove home, I called Riley. How'd it go? They asked. She apologized. Actually apologized. Took responsibility. Wow. How do you feel? Confused. Cautiously hopeful. Terrified I'm being manipulated again. I paused. But also, lighter? Like I can finally stop carrying the question of why. Even if we never have a relationship, at least I know it wasn't because I was unlovable. It was because she was broken. That's huge, Jay. Yeah, it is. Over the next few months, my mother and I developed something like a relationship. We met for coffee every few weeks. She asked about my work, my life, my happiness. She didn't try to force reconciliation with Melissa or my father, who was on his own slower journey of realization. She respected my boundaries, even when they meant missing out on parts of my life. It wasn't perfect. Some days I was angry, resentful of how easy it had been for her to hurt me and how hard I had to work to heal. But other days, I could see her trying, really trying, and slowly, I started to believe that people could change not into perfect versions of themselves, but into more honest ones. My father reached out next, 6 months after my mother. His apology was stiffer, more awkward, but no less sincere. We started having monthly dinners, just the two of us, where he'd ask about my work and I'd teach him about graphic design. It was strange and uncomfortable and nothing like a traditional father-son relationship, but it was something. And something was infinitely better than silence. Melissa, I didn't see. She reached out once, through Aunt Linda, asking if we could talk. I declined. Maybe someday I'd be ready, but that day hadn't come. Linda reported that Melissa was doing better therapy, a new job, a growing awareness of the harm she'd caused. I was genuinely happy for her growth, but I didn't need to witness it. A year after walking away from my family, I hosted my first gallery show. It was a collection of designs that told stories of survival, resilience, and chosen family. The turnout was better than I'd expected. Clients, friends, fellow artists, and strangers who'd heard about the show through social media. Riley stood beside me as people filtered through, their hand in mine. We'd started dating 3 months ago, a natural evolution of a friendship that had always been more. They'd been terrified of ruining our friendship, but I'd told them the truth. They were already my family. Making it romantic just made it official. Halfway through the night, I saw my mother and father enter the gallery. I'd invited them, but I hadn't expected them to come. They looked nervous, out of place among the queer artists and activists who filled the space, but they looked, really looked, at my work, at my life, at the person I'd become. When I stopped trying to be who they wanted, my mother approached me, tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful, Jordan. All of it. You're so talented." "Thank you," I said. "I'm sorry we missed so much," my father added, his voice rough. "Me too," I said honestly. "But I'm not missing it anymore." After they left, Riley pulled me close. "You did it," they whispered. "You built something real." "We did it," I corrected, because the truth I'd learned over the past year was this: family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up when it matters. It's who celebrates your victories and mourns your losses. It's who sees you, really sees you, and loves you anyway. I'd spent my whole life getting silence from the people who were supposed to love me loudly, but in the quiet space that silence created, I'd found my own voice. I'd found Riley, Aunt Linda, Diane from the bookstore, clients who became friends, and a community of people who understood what it meant to be invisible and fight your way into being seen. My sister had gotten everything: the love, the support, the attention, the privileges. And for years, I'd thought that meant I'd gotten nothing. But I'd been wrong. She'd gotten the easy path, the one that required no growth, no struggle, no transformation. She'd gotten comfort that made her complacent and love that asked nothing of her. I'd gotten something better. I'd gotten to become myself. The silence my family gave me had been cruel, but in learning to fill that silence with my own voice, I'd discovered something they could never take away: my own worth, independent of their recognition. That was my revenge, not destroying them, but thriving without them, not making them hurt, but refusing to hurt anymore. And in the end, standing in a gallery, surrounded by people who loved me, looking at art that told my story in my own words, I realized something profound. I hadn't just survived my family, I'd transcended them. They'd given me silence, and I'd turned it into a symphony. And that was the happiest ending I could have imagined: not reconciliation or revenge, but liberation, the freedom to finally be gloriously, unapologetically, completely myself.